Rabbi Dr. Deborah Kahn-Harris is the principal of the college where she teaches Bible, and her book Polyamory and Reading the Book of Ruth was published last year and was highlighted at our first event. Rabbi Professor Johanna Stiebert taught Hebrew language, Hebrew Bible, and Judaism at St. Martin's University College in Lancaster. And then she taught at the University of Botswana at the start of the millennium, the University of Tennessee, and since September 2009, she's been at the Theology and Religious Studies Department at Leeds University.
Sorry, if I may make a very quick correction. I appreciate the honorific, but I am the gatecrasher here. I'm not a rabbi. But
did I say rabbi? I'm sorry. Rabbi Robyn Ashworth-Steen is currently studying for PhD in Rabbinic Leadership and Biblical Studies with the University of Leeds and in collaboration with Leo Baeck College. Robyn is currently co-chair of the Assembly of Reform Rabbis and Cantors in the UK and teaches at Leo Baeck College, both through the Lehr House and I think on the rabbinic program as well. So those are our three speakers, and I'm going to say a very brief word about our fundraising campaign. When the businessman Israel Jacobson opened the world's first Reform synagogue in Zaysen in 1810, it was attached to a Jewish day school. He wanted a place for the school graduations, but he also wanted to open a synagogue where non-Jewish visitors could feel comfortable. This was part of his mission to help Jews in Germany at that time come into the wider society. But one thing he certainly wasn't thinking of was his new shul as a place for adult learners. But it didn't take very long before the fledgling reform movement took that on. In 1819, Leopold Zuntz founded his Society for the Culture and Academic Study of Judaism, and liberal, reform, and progressive rabbis have been leaders of academic study of Judaism ever since. When I was a rabbinic student at the college, I had the privilege of learning from rabbis John Rayner, Albert Friedlander, Lionel Blue, and Louis Jacobs, Zichronam Livracha. And those were the heady days when somehow rabbis managed to write scholarly volumes and at the same time work full-time in congregations. I don't know how they did it, especially when you consider the quality of what they wrote. So to help our appeal this year, I conducted a little survey of my own, and I discovered that out of the 200 plus alumni of the college, 48, astonishingly high number, have either authored or edited a published work. It's a massive achievement and a huge credit to the inspirational learning that happens at LBC. So the fundraising is to advance progressive Jewish scholarship in this country, and I'm confident you will want to support it. There is a link in the chat, and you can also see it on the screen. You just go to lbc.ac.uk and press the button. It's easy, I promise you, it doesn't hurt, and the college will be very, very grateful. So now over to Deborah, who's going to introduce this evening's program.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for being our interlocutor this evening. I just want to tell you a little bit about the germination of the idea behind this session and how it's going to work. You need to have your fingers ready for your keyboards, because although you're going to hear a lot from myself and Robyn and Johanna, we're also going to ask you to participate at various points. which for most of the session will be restricted to the chat function. And towards the end of this session, we will have an opportunity for participants to ask us questions. So think as we are talking what you want to ask of us, please. So we have a series of questions that Michael's going to ask the three of us that we will respond to, and we're going to intersperse that with some little activities for all of you to participate in. So where did this session come from? It might seem like I don't know what it seems like as an idea for a session, but where its genesis is in a few years ago now. The Journal for Interdisciplinary Biblical Studies had a call for papers on pedagogical approaches to activism in the classroom, and I invited Robyn to co-author a paper with me based on her experience of studying in my classroom at Stiebert College, because what Michael didn't say, of course, is that both Robyn and I are alumni of Stiebert, as is Michael. So we wrote this paper. It's a fantastic process. You'll hear more about that during the session. The journal edition was so successful that Johanna found a way to get it edited together and has produced, yes, put it in front of the camera, this newly published collection, Activism, Bible, and Research-Based Teaching, which was literally, I only received my copy 2 days ago in the post. It is available from Sheffield Phoenix Press, and now also available in the Stiebert College Library. Another great resource of the college. So that is the germination of this session, is really the interaction that came out of the production of this article and then the book and the themes that came out of it, and actually the work that now the three of us have gone on to do together. And I hope that during the course of this session, you're going to hear a lot more about that and how it works. But we are going to start with a little bit of interactivity. So I hope your fingers are ready, and I'm going to hand over to Robyn to explain.
Great, lovely. I think I used the word in our prep meeting, interactivity. I'm not even sure it's a word, but we're all about language and new language here. So the first question, you can see it on your screen, and I'm going to explain very briefly why we want to ask this question. The question is, what words come to mind when you hear the word activism? So please put in those words to the chat, just whatever comes to mind. And there's two reasons we're doing this. One, we know when we're doing academic Jewish work and study, we want to interrogate the terms that we use. We want to really ask, what does that word mean? What are we talking to as well? And the second reason we're doing it is, and this is partly, maybe we can talk about this more later, my understanding of what we're doing is about recognizing that we are each situated in our own experiences and bodies, and that shapes how we understand things. So I say activism and I have a particular lineage and story that comes to mind, and everyone else will have their own way. So this exercise is a way of us really thinking about what do I think of activism. So I can see you've jumped in, so I'm going to read some of them out for us as we start to think, and we're really going to dig deep into this term, obviously, in the session. So we've got energy. I love that. Great. Energy, right? Activism is about energy, creating energy, being part of energy, a cause, having a cause. Yeah, maybe a purpose or something, as they say, that gets you up in the morning or keeps you up at night, something that you feel passionate about. Sherry, aka Mum, has said, making change in the world, that you hope with your activism, you're doing something. Action, engagement from Johanna. Courage, yeah, that it takes courage to do activism. That's interesting. Focus on action, about doing action. I think that's interesting, and we'll come back to the courage and the action in some of the quotations we're going to share from the book a bit later. Having commitment, Rabbi Margaret says, yeah. Using your voice, that's come up a couple of times. Volunteering and protesting from Fiona and Howard as well. Streets, That's interesting. You have to tell us more what you mean by that, can't you, Rachel? I've got ideas of what that means. Using our voice again, having integrity, music and singing. Yeah, there's a great history and importance of how music can, one, be in protest, but also move us to action, or also express what we need to be expressed that maybe we can't in words, like Miriam, who sung and danced her way through her prophecy. Change, protesting, commitment again, involvement, getting involved. Yeah, and Deborah's added in the personal is political, which is kind of what I was intimating before, that we move in the world through our experiences, and that's political action. The importance of listening, of having compassion, of chutzpah. That's a great word for it. Yeah, there's a bit of the courage hidden in there as well, but also doing something outside your comfort zone as well. Having empathy. Yeah, that's a really important one. And then one of the chapters in this new book is about empathy and activism, that you need to be able to step into what it is to be in someone else's shoes, and that relation and that connection can drive you to action through that. And then we've got these important words from student Rabbi Rachel: challenge and power. There's a lot of things to talk about with power that's to do with activism, how we use our own, how we build power, which power we're challenging as well, and solipsism. Thank you, Keith, for that end of that. End of it. It's a great word. I feel some of Rabbi Sheila Shulman, Zichronah Livracha, is in the room if we get words that I don't quite understand the meaning of. That's great. Lovely. So we've got a picture of activism, and what's really interesting is a lot of that isn't about what the activism is, but a lot of it is about what we need to take action and what we're looking towards, making change, moving in the world, energy. So it's kind of interesting that we haven't spoken about the methods of it. So maybe that's less important than we think. And actually what's more important is what we're feeling and what we're aiming towards as well. Great exercise to get us started. So I will pass over now to Michael, I think.
So thank you, Robyn. We have our first discussion question, and I'm going to ask our speakers to talk for up to 5 minutes each about this, and I will be strict on the timing. And the question is, what was a classroom activist moment for you? What was a classroom activist moment for you? Johanna, would you go first, please?
Right. Well, thank you for having me here. Really, really delightful to be here. I think I'm somebody who, long before I became a teacher, I considered myself an activist. I think already as a teenager, I was quite comfortable with the name activist, but not when I entered the classroom for the longest time. I think for a very long time, I felt I had to separate those two identities quite firmly. And thinking about that, some of it has to do, I believe, with growing up in 1970s Germany, where because of the history of Germany, there was a real imperative not to bring either religion or politics into the classroom. And so for me, I really felt those were things I needed to separate out. Reflecting on this question of an activist classroom moment, I have to admit to myself that these moments are very unpredictable and often spontaneous. They pop into your head sometimes as you are standing there. You can't really plan for them. And that pertains also to when we teach a text over and over again in quite significant ways. We really never teach the same text twice, even if it may be the same chapters of Hosea or Genesis. I think the first moment that came to my mind when I saw this question is the one I'll turn to, and it takes a little bit of a story, which I'll try to keep short enough so that Michael doesn't give me the nod for running out of time. And it pertains to, as Michael mentioned, my time teaching in Botswana, which was to me a very unfamiliar environment and very early on in my career, at the time when I still felt that the activist had to stay outside of the classroom when the instructor was there. It was a bit like, you know, the picture of Dorian Gray. The two had to be very separated out. And one thing about teaching in Botswana that was difficult for me is that I was given a syllabus. I was given the subjects I had to teach. I was even given the books I had to use, which included John Bright's History of Israel, to my tremendous dismay. And I was told to teach a course on an introduction to Judaism. And as part of that, I was given one lecture and one lecture only to teach on the Holocaust. And to make matters even more difficult, this module had never been taught before. And so I had nothing really to go on. I was simply given a list of things and the days on which to teach them. And I was given books, and in this case, no books. There were no books to help the students. And this was, you know, in 2000. So before, it was very easy to use the internet to download sources and give them to students. So I decided I couldn't teach all of it by any means. I couldn't even teach very much of it. And it became very clear to me very quickly that my students had really nothing to work with. It was stunning to me as somebody who in the 1970s had nothing else in history other than the Holocaust, with the kind of horror added to that these were the people I was living amongst. You know, this was in Germany. And I found myself now in Botswana in a classroom full of students who had no idea what the Holocaust was at all. And so I tried, can one teach this gently? I still do not feel I've ever found a way to teach any of this material in any way that has ever made me feel that it could convey much of anything. But I tried. And I tried by teaching about the years leading up to the Holocaust. And what happened was that there was absolutely stunned silence. And that didn't surprise me. But what surprised me was the question that came next. And that was the teaching moment for me. And the question was, when the students all sat back, one of them finally spoke and said, but the Jews were white. And in a classroom full of Black students, it dawned on me, given their history and their surrounding with the proximity of apartheid South Africa, that this was something they found particularly difficult to understand. They had internalized something of an acceptance regarding racism when it was white on Black. And this was something that had never really struck me in quite that way before. And what it drew me to, and the kind of activist moment for me in that instant, was about that word that Deborah just put into the chat, which is empathy. Which was that really strong reminder, which I've tried to really keep at the forefront of my mind as activist and classroom person in the classroom, that facilitating critical thinking is not enough, that it has to be absolutely accompanied with critical empathy and with making every attempt to try and understand the people who've walked into the classroom. And so for me, that was one moment that's always stayed with me. I've had many activist moments since, but that one has probably had a more profound impact on me than many of the others.
Well, thank you, Johanna, for sharing that very moving and fascinating story. Robyn, please.
Thanks. I also picked, like Johanna, a moment that had the most profound effect on me. There are many moments I could choose from rabbinic school, from law school, undergrad, you name it, because I've done a lot of studying because I cannot stop because I love it. But I'm going to take us back to my primary school, actually. So we were in class maths, and I hated maths, still do. And we had a very scary maths teacher. I was in an all-girls school, so she decided that to try and teach us how you work out the average, that we would all, I'm going to watch everyone's faces, we all would weigh ourselves and write on a piece of paper how much we weighed. So you can imagine that would not happen today. We then had to add them all up. They were anonymous. We added them all up and we created the average weight of a child in the classroom. You can imagine. The teacher at the front of the class had them all in front and picked one out and said, "This cannot be the right weight. It's far too heavy. Who wrote this down?" And a classmate of mine put her hand up hesitantly and said, "That was mine." And she said, "Come out." It actually makes me quite emotional telling this story. She said, "Come up to the front." And she weighed her in front of everybody and said, "I apologize, that was the correct weight." And she sat back down. It's a horrifying story and it kind of sounds like it isn't real, but I remember it as if it was yesterday. And I didn't say anything in that moment. And I think that's partly that word power that we had before. I felt in that moment, and I've learned since it's not true, but then felt that I had absolutely no power. I don't think I even understood what I could have done in there. And I'm not even sure, I was only 11, I could have understood what was wrong about that moment in terms of her responsibility to the class and my responsibility as a student. I was 11, so I'm not beating myself up about it. But I think what I've learned from that is what it feels like to be in a place where it is not an activist, it is not intentionally an activist space. In fact, it's an oppressive space. So I really learned in that moment what oppression feels like in a classroom. And I think part of my obsession with teaching and activist learning is to never put anyone in that situation again. So what happened in that moment was there was power over, the teacher used her power over the students and she shamed somebody. And we know in Jewish teaching that if you shame someone publicly, it's as if you shed blood. It's a violent act, and that happened to her in front of everyone in a vulnerable moment at a vulnerable age as well. There was racism going on in that moment for sure. There was misogyny around bodies. There was othering, objectification, domination. These are words I can use now, but my body at 11 probably felt these things, just couldn't articulate them. So I really just in that moment really understood that I would never lead a class or be a student in a class where someone would be shamed, that I would have responsibility through power with my fellow classroom, my fellow learners, or just by myself to be able to stand up. And I've become obsessed with finding spaces and experiencing spaces and leading spaces where everyone can bring their full selves and be safe to experiment and express. And I guess with Johanna, like those questions, there is a safety that they were able to ask hard questions and that we're able to hear them as well, because activist classrooms should be about asking difficult questions and having hard conversations. It's not about turning away from them. In fact, they're great spaces to experiment and test the boundaries of language and thought as well. And that challenge and doubt and dissent is important. But yeah, for me, that moment was a real activist moment. And I have kind of regret for not speaking up, although I don't blame myself. But I think I've held it with me of having a profound influence. And I can still tap into the righteous anger that I feel on behalf of my fellow 11-year-old friend who was shamed in that way.
Thank you, Robyn. Another very powerful story. Deborah, over to you.
So I've also could have chosen so many moments, and this was a moment that was really transformative for me and actually quite foundational in my own desire, not simply to become a teacher, but also to train my colleagues to be rabbis. So I'm going to take you back to my time at Liebert College when I was training for the rabbinate. I was there between 1991 and 1996 on the rabbinic program, which is actually, to me, seems like yesterday, but it was really a different time, and it was quite some time ago. And I'm going to situate this in a way that it wasn't situated for me, and just say a little trigger warning that I'm going to be talking about sexual violence. So if that's hard for you, then feel free to go away and come back. But what I want to talk about is Talmud. One of my Talmud classes, I was in a classroom with 3 female students. And our professor, who was a very learned man and a very gentle man and a very kind man and very knowledgeable, but also generationally much older than we were. So we were 3 relatively young women. And he wanted to very much to teach us about martyrology, which is fine. It's an interesting section of Talmudic literature. Unfortunately, if you want to study martyrology, the foundational text is a text about something known as the Rodef. And the Rodef is the person who pursues after another person in order to harm them, primarily to kill them. And the Talmud asks, the rabbis ask, what do you do in those situations? Are you allowed to even go so far as to kill this pursuer in order to save somebody else? And the Talmud says, yes, you are under certain circumstances allowed to do that. And one of those circumstances is around rape. And so there's a very graphic and detailed section of the Talmud that explains exactly what constitutes rape. And in our classroom of 3 younger women and an older male scholar, at least one of those women was a survivor of child sexual abuse. And our professor was sweet and kind and clueless. And he sent us home and said, prepare this section. And we came into class, the 3 of us in different ways, carrying a huge amount of anger and frustration and horror, real horror about this text. And he just said, but it's just a hypothetical rabbinic situation. It's not real. And anyway, we really need to translate this bit and get on, because I want to get to the bit at the end about martyrology. And we said, no, you can't do that. You can't just dismiss this, right? And it was a real activist moment for us, standing up for what we understood to be something quite traumatic, and challenging his view that this was just a kind of hypothetical legal conversation, or that even if it was, that you could even have a hypothetical legal conversation about the graphic details of at which point in a physical act do you actually have rape occurring, especially when you make no presumptions about who are the people sitting in your classroom and where their real life experience might intersect with that. And so we did say something, we did challenge it, we sort of derailed the class for a session, but actually, and I don't know that he ever really understood why we were so traumatized by that, but we did speak up for ourselves, and we spoke up for each other. And that was really powerful. And it also made me think there has to be a better way to teach this material. There has to be a safer way to do this. It was long before people had words like trigger warnings or thought about teaching texts in a way like that. And it's made me transform the way I think about my teaching. And if we have to discuss difficult texts, but we also have to situate them, and we have to build trust in the classroom, and we have to build trust between students and teachers, and we have to create spaces where we can react from our personal space in order to challenge those texts and also to learn from them. And there are many ways to learn from them. So that's a thing that I now aim to do in my classroom that I hope has changed an approach to how we teach at the college.
Thank you, Deborah. A second story about a teacher mistake, yours and Robyn's. A lot to reflect on there. We're going to come back to activism in 15 minutes' time. But first of all, we're going to go on to, do we need these slides up for this? We're going to go on to question 2. At this time, I have a slightly different question for each of you. As an overall heading about Jewish scholarship, because we're Rabbi Scholar Activists tonight. Why does Jewish scholarship, particularly the scholarship at Liobek College, matter? Why does Jewish scholarship, particularly the scholarship at Liobek College, matter? And so, Johanna, please, I'd like to ask you to talk for 5 minutes about why you think it might matter to the wider academy.
Yes, so the wider academy is where I teach. I teach at Leeds University, which has a very, very mixed campus. It's offers a predominantly secular education, and I teach in a department of theology and religious studies, which is becoming more diverse, but which started out as very much a Christian theology department. It isn't that now, but it still calls itself a Department of Theology and Religious Studies. Now, I don't think that progressive Judaism of Liobek College, owes the non-Jewish world an explanation of itself. And I do know that, for people who know what progressive Judaism is, that it isn't Judaism light or anything of that kind. But I think in the world we live in, and I see this on my campus right now with the tensions that are rife there, that ignorance about Judaism, including about progressive Judaism, does enormous harm. And therefore, I do think there is something of a value that progressive Judaism and Judaism such as is taught at Liobek College, which I had the great pleasure of visiting when Deborah invited me, really does have something of a role to play. I can confirm that when Deborah came to our campus and spoke at our seminar for the Center for Religion and Public Life, Deborah's research on polyamory was really received with enormous excitement and great joy. And I had 2 undergraduates choosing to write dissertations on that was very much directly inspired by her talk. And I can also confirm that Robyn's presence on our campus and in our seminar has been such a gift, and how much I'm looking forward to Robyn teaching in our classrooms. So I see tremendous value and have personally benefited enormously as an outsider from the work that is happening in your college. And I'm just so grateful for who you are and what you do, and for the space it affords and the welcome it affords. So above all, it's a big thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for expressing it. So for you, Robyn, why does Jewish scholarship, especially at the college, matter to progressive congregations, do you think?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? And I feel like this is my elevator pitch about why scholarship is so important to move clergy away from maybe being dogs' bodies or chief execs of communities to being able to teach and be scholars and have time. This is what Michael was intimating before. I think primarily why I think scholarship, Jewish scholarship and Jewish scholarship that is grounded and connected through Liebert College is important to communities is because there are so many urgent questions being asked of us as humans and as Jews, individually and collectively at the moment. There are so many seismic shifts that are happening in our world. I don't need to name them, but some of them: climate emergency, the structural racism and misogyny that we're understanding, and ableism and homophobia, transphobia that is kind of we're working out is kind of in everything and has built the world that we're living in. The deepening of understanding around gender is a big conversation that happens in communities. Wars, conflict, polarization, and rise in technology. The list could go on. We're really at a time where tremendous change has happened very quickly. And scholarship, I think, and this is why I've kind of dedicated now this part of my career to stepping into it more fully, is able to answer that question that resonates from Genesis. Ayeka, where are you? What are you doing? What's your responsibility? What can you do? What can we do? And I think that being able, well, so the rabbis had an answer, right? Because Jewish history has been through times of crisis, deep crisis and trauma, time and time and time again. And the rabbis' response, as we know, after the destruction of the Second Temple, the answer was study. We're going to study, and we're going to study together. And they really believed, and I believe, that divinity rests when people are studying together. And maybe we could have another conversation on what I mean by divinity, because it's probably not what you think. But the idea that something holy happens, something sacred that is marked and different to the everyday happens when we study. And what I think by that is, if we can bring into community how I understand activist, feminist hermeneutics, ways of reading, ways of interpreting, is that we're introducing into communities critical thinking, the ability to really ask hard questions, but really asking what is going on, what's at play here, what are the tropes, what are the narratives, what's the fear, where is this coming from, in order to grapple with it. And they're really quality spaces. They can help us gain solid ground, give us perspective, and help us primarily do new thinking. And I think that's what we really need, is because the way that we're all doing it at the moment, it sounds very extreme, but I don't think is working. We have less and less people globally going to religious institutions. It's not a progressive Jewish thing. It's not a Jewish thing. It's everywhere. It's not a British thing. And I think that means we have to do things differently. We have to think differently. We have to speak differently. And study and scholarship afford spaces for people to be able to do that work and to bring people along with them. And the reason why I think this is all activist and not separate from it is that I think also that within communities, the type of scholars that we're bringing as rabbis at the moment into communities and through the Lair House and everything, is that study has the ability to transform lives, to enrich lives as well. So the more that we can have spaces where we're able to take a step back, where we can be critical, where we can look at the harmful narratives and the positive narratives, we have a chance of undoing some of the issues that we have and being able to recognize our answer to Ayeka, where are you and how can we work in this world?
Thank you. Thank you for the challenge. So, Deborah, this question's a bit of a mouthful. You are asked, please, to think of the link between biblical studies and the practical implications of studying it out there in the wider world and the world of work. So with that in mind, why does Jewish scholarship, particularly at the college, matter?
I mean, just first, I just want to say, given that we're in the British election season, hopefully this will resonate. I just want to say I agree with Robyn. So harkening back to a previous election cycle. Anyway, everything Robyn says, alachat kama v'kama. But I want to just share briefly this quotation, which I use when I teach always. It's like my most important kind of quotation that I use when I teach. And it's from a book on Lamentations by a woman named Colleen Mandolfo. The current social wars raging over biblical interpretations should make it clear that the choices we make about reading have political consequences as significant as those we make in the voting booth or with our checkbook. Our reading practices in part construct the symbolic world we inhabit and serve to motivate and justify our actions. Because words, particularly biblical words, possess the power to muster armies, we must approach the text with a certain ethical consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that is a foundational sentiment about why biblical study matters. And it's also foundational for me, although it was not written in a Jewish context. For me, it's important because actually, as somebody, particularly as somebody who was not raised in the United Kingdom, like Johanna, I'm not native originally to these shores. I was raised in Texas, in what's affectionately known as the Bible Belt. And I know very well what the power of the biblical text can be. And I know very well how it can be both used and misused and abused. And so for me, and I've had the words of the biblical text thrown at me in my face when growing up by people who read the text differently to me. So I believe that we must have an ethical consciousness, that the power, that biblical study matters. It matters in so many places in our lives. Sometimes we aren't even conscious of them. It turns up in advertising. A colleague, Johanna, and I know quite well, wrote an entire book, Katie Edwards, about the power of Eve, the figure of biblical character Eve in advertising, right? It appears in literature that we read in quotations. It appears in all sorts of assumptions that people make about what's right, what's wrong, what's ethical, what's not. It appears in the lazy terminology of us having some sort of Judeo-Christian approach to things, which I think we really need to challenge, because the Jewish approach is not the Christian approach. And I think that we as Jews, particularly progressive Jews, by which I don't just mean like people who affiliate to the World Union, but I mean those of us who have a more liberal outlook, who have a more progressive approach broadly, have a responsibility to demonstrate in our lives, in our research, in our teaching, in what we write and how we talk to people, that the biblical text is multivocal, and that it can be, in the right hands, used for all the good stuff that Robyn was talking about as well, right? And I think it's really, really important that message gets out into the world. And Stiebert College is one of the places we can do that. We can develop that thinking. And in the UK, it's the only place we can do that. We are the only progressive seminary in the country, one of a tiny number worldwide. And our study, what we do, we believe in what's known as research-led teaching as well. So what we research and what we write about also informs how we teach and how we take this interpretation of our sacred texts. And for me, as a Bible scholar, the Hebrew Bible is the root of that, out into the world, and how we begin the process of interacting in the wider academy, like Johanna talked about. And we can see also from the stories you've already heard, Johanna's story about Botswana and other encounters that we have all the time, that our voices, we are numerically small, but massively important in terms of disseminating the kinds of research and study that we do into the world.
Thank you. Please, everybody, hold on to your questions for now. We will have a chance later on. But at the moment, we have another activity based on some photos. So back to you, Deborah. 3 minutes for this.
Thank you. So I am showing you some lovely photos that that Robyn and Johanna and I collected. You might recognize some of us in these photos. And I would just like you in the chat box, of course, to talk about which of these photos represent activism to you, and in what way? What way would you think that they represent activism? So a little bit in the chat boxes, do any of these look like activism? What about them looks like activism to you? And of course, we curated these photos so we think they look like activism. So if you don't participate, then you will. Right? Yes. So one of those photos looks like interfaith dialogue. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Examples of solidarities with other communities and groups, absolutely. So so some of what we're talking about is reaching out to people beyond our normal little groups. And the question isn't necessarily what activism looks like so much as when it is useful to classify activities as activism. And yes, Sherry, absolutely, the inclusion of women, and we will address sort of overtly feminist concerns. And it is quite interesting that the one more, if you like, historic photo in there, the little black and white photo at the corner, doesn't have any women in it. Something we should maybe think about. Men and women praying together is, again, we may think that's really normative, but it is actually quite radical if you take it across history, and even within certain communities today. Women and queers wearing traditional male objects, ritual objects, absolutely, carrying a Torah with black right, yeah, at the bottom right. That was that's a photo from the Freedom March with Martin Luther King, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, famously, he described it as praying with his feet, being part of the civil rights movement there. Howard says, reaching out to other faith groups to try and reach an understanding of each other, absolutely. Conversations and building relationships, teaching with activism in mind, absolutely. And that photo down there in the center bottom is a photo of my classroom. And that's exactly what I think I'm doing. Yeah, it is MLK. And praying and studying as a way of inspiring and moving us to action. Absolutely. So, you know, it's quite interesting. The rabbi, food is always activism. Thanks, Kat, to Rachel. But what I was going to say is the rabbis, a very famous missioner that talks about what are the things we need to do in this life in order to earn our place in the world to come. And it's all a list of things that sound like activism, things like visiting the sick and accompanying the bride, and attending funerals, and looking after each other in all sorts of ways. But it's a list of 10 things. And at the end it says, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah is more important effectively than the rest of them, which is why I wanted to put teaching in there, because the study of Torah is what they say leads to all of these activities. And I think making sure to be counted in struggles for equality and fairness in society, absolutely. And I think we can all say that as scholars of the Hebrew Bible, it is that scholarship that underpins every piece of these works of activism, praying and protesting and talking to people from other traditions and cultures and teaching and marching and all of those other things that you guys have listed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. We're going to go on to 2 more questions, although the last one will be a very brief one. We've looked at scholarship, we've looked at activism, and now with this question we bring the 2 together, because the question is, what is activist Bible study? Does it matter to you? And if so, how? So, Robyn, you've got 5 minutes, please, on activist Bible study.
Oh, I'm so glad I go first, because I think this is such a great question. In my notes preparing for this, my very geeky answer was, for me, nothing else will do. Now, I'll explain that. So I was a really geeky child and a geeky adult. I used to make myself Hebrew grammar notebooks. I have 3 that I made as a child because I just love studying. I know, it was very sweet. And I went through life being really attracted to studying Torah. That's why I chose to be a rabbi when I was 11. I think I just loved being able to ask questions and to study with other people and hear their opinions about it, and my voice being recognized and allowed to ask the questions. I always believed as well that being Jewish and practicing Judaism in the world was a way to l'takein, to repair the brokenness of the world. Like, that's our progressive Jewish heritage, that we believe that we have a responsibility to repair a bit of the brokenness. I really understood that. So I went on my journey searching for a way to express my Jewishness in what I now call activism, of like how to repair the world through being Jewish. I went to Cambridge to study theology and religious studies, and I did not have the kind of experience I was looking for. Johanna and I have spoken about this before. I was very much taught that here is the Bible, here's the Old Testament, and there you are as a reader, that there is no connection, and actually your job is to be as objective as you possibly can. So we were trying to discern, what was the text telling us? When was it written? Who was it written by? What did this grammar mean about the time period it would have been written in? Who I was as a person and how I was reacting and feeling to what was going on was irrelevant, which I think mirrors what you were saying, Deborah, with your story you shared before, that there was no sense of a connection to me. So there I really was confused about and harmed by being separate from a text that I really was in loving struggle with, as Sheila Shulman would say. I came into touch with activist biblical studies in Deborah's class at Rabbinic Studies, which is crazy that it took me that long. But my gosh, my mind was blown. I got introduced to lots of queer theory, post-colonial theory, feminist queer theory as well. And all of that enabled me to be deeply connected to the text, to argue with the text, to bring myself and my experience and all my separate identities to it, and to be really critical in thinking, why is it that I interpret it like that? And to also realize, this is a quote from one of Johanna's books, that the inner workings of the text has a way of working in our world, to really understand that the Bible has shaped and is constantly shaping the world that we live in today. And I came to realize that that's where my activism probably lies at its strongest. It is being able to find ways to be in dialogue with the text and to study it with other people in a way that can be liberative, in a way that can lead to action and emancipation for everyone. And I'm going to give you a very small example of moments where my mind is blown and I realize the assumptions I carry. So Johanna and Deborah are 2 of 3 of my PhD supervisors, and I just put in a bit of work for my end of my first year. And I was happily typing away about prophecy in the ancient Near East. And Johanna had made a comment and saying, might you want to say ancient West Asia? And I thought, I've not heard that phrase before. And I Googled it. And I had my mind blown of what that phrase ancient Near East says, and the colonial Western assumptions, that there is an East that is closer to me, so we're going to call that the ancient Near East. So the way we talk is about the location, which I hadn't even thought about, and to call it West Asia, like, sure, maybe it's not exactly West Asia, but it's a better description of something that is relatively geographically correct than saying something is near. And in that moment, it was again a moment of pain, a moment of healing in some way, of being able to say, okay, I'm going to step into using a language which it's not about my privilege, and it's not about understanding that we are better here in the West, or that my location is how the whole world sees itself. And that was a real moment of learning for me in it as well. So it's about starting with our language as well, and really being out in the world. And what I would say as well, from being at college and then working as a full-time community rabbi, echoing what everyone else has said, is that when I was in different spaces, that Jewish and non-Jewish, from the cathedral to a school, I recognized how powerful call it progressive Jewish voice can be in the world, that it felt kind of revolutionary and countercultural in a way. And this is all the activist biblical study for me is all the same thing. It's about how to speak critically, how to be nuanced, how to hold complexity, how to make sure what we're doing is learning towards action. That's what the rabbis told us as well, to interrogate that. And I remember I was on the BBC doing a piece on Beyond Belief, and the producer said, this is amazing. And I was like, but this is what we talk about all the time at Liabeck College. This is not new. I've been studying this for like 5 years plus through the college. But in that space, it felt different. And in the world that we're living in now, it feels more and more relevant, because I think we're seeing domination, white supremacy, the patriarchy, hierarchy, which is a word that I've recently learned and captures intersecting kind of racism and misogyny and ableism, all of that. We're seeing that play out, and it plays out because in large part it's captured in the Bible. So if we can find a way to be critical friends towards the Torah, to be able to lift up, as Sheila Schulman said, the streams of righteousness that it holds, everything depends on that. That's why for me nothing else matters. And if I can't do that, I don't think I could be Jewish, because I couldn't with integrity stand by a book or something that I say to be sacred if I'm not doing the work of actually having a difficult dialogue with it. I have so much more to say, but I'm going to just round it up because I have a feeling that I'm out of time.
Thank you, Robyn.
Yeah.
Deborah, bringing activism and Bible study together, please.
No worries. I'll try and be a bit briefer. I think it's a lot of what we've already been talking about. For me, it's always been part of how I've understood my academic approach, but the point at which it really became transformative for me was when I realized I wasn't working by myself doing that sort of thing. And for me, that moment was really about, Johanna's going to tell me the exact year. I think it was 2016 or 2017, the Shiloh conference, or thereabouts. When I saw a call 17, I saw a call for papers at Sheffield, where I'd done my PhD, for a conference that Johanna and a couple of other colleagues, Katie Edwards and Caroline Life, I think, had been putting together. The Shiloh project is about rape culture in the Bible, and they had an open call for papers, and it felt like something that I could write about. And I'd also been in post for a number of years, so busy running the college that I really hadn't had time to do my own academic work. And I very cautiously submitted a paper. And at that point, the only other academic conferences I'd been to had either been huge and overwhelming, or they'd been very male dominated, or they'd been really focused on the sort of thing that a lot of biblical studies is focused on. can you parse this verb in detail and show me your dictionary work? Or have you seen this tiny piece of archaeological evidence, sort of thing? And I went with a great deal of trepidation to the Shiloh conference with my little paper that I didn't think a great deal of, and felt such overwhelming support and kinship for the things that I thought were important and wanted to say. And colleagues who said, this should be a blog post. Have you thought of writing an article? Have you thought of publishing this? Have you? And I realized there was a whole world of people who shared my approach and my outlook. And we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about why I think that was the feminist aspect of that was also so important. And they weren't all Jews. They were from all different places and cultural and religious and ethnic backgrounds. But they all understood the power of the text. And I came away with a really different feeling about what was possible, and could see the real meaningful ways in which the text made difference in different people's lives. And I guess fundamentally for me, what is activist about the study of Jewish texts is what the rabbis tell us or instruct us to do in Pirkei Avot, in the very first section in 1:1, where it says, raise up many students. Fundamentally, that is the most activist thing that I feel I can ever do. As a single voice, there's only so much weight that it carries, only so much distance that it travels. But when you raise up many students and you teach them and you learn from them, then the things that you think carry far beyond the shores of where your own voice can stretch to. So for me, that is fundamentally what activism is.
Thank you, Deborah. Over to you, please, Johanna.
Oh, thank you. So much has been said that just really resonates with me so much. I like the active in activism. I'm not someone who likes to get bored. And so what I like about activism folded into my job, which happens to be to teach Hebrew Bible, is that it keeps things relevant. It keeps things meaningful. It keeps me interested. I've also found the Bible, which, as Deborah mentions, is enmeshed in so many different parts of life and across the world. It's a great medium for meeting different people, and I'm always interested in meeting different people. It's a great medium for opening conversations through a kind of shared medium. So it's very useful for connecting people. You can go to a different part of the world and there will be interest in the biblical text, even among people who may not feel a confessional commitment to it. But as Deborah said, in different parts of the world, she mentioned Texas. I lived in Tennessee for 6 years, and I was a little gobsmacked by how differently texts that I had read in one way could be read in a very different context. I was personally reminded when Robyn has just touched on the West Asia bit about how we just have to keep learning and constantly get awoken to different meanings, about the activist potential of the Bible. And again, I'll just quickly go back to Botswana. When I was there, it was the height of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And because of that, and because of the dreadful toll it was taken, including on the young people on our campus, we were given a set of instructions about how every single one of us had to get on board with a commitment to working against the dreadful toll the pandemic was taking. And to my absolute horror, I still had a bit of the activist stays outside of the classroom in me at this time even. We were told in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies that our job was to teach abstinence. And I was horrified at this, you know, and I point blank refused. I said, I'm not going to do that. I won't preach something I won't practice myself. I don't think it works. I'm not going to do it. And at that point, my colleague, the wonderful Musa Dube, who is a womanist critic of the Bible, which means she's a Black feminist working from a post-colonial perspective, she came into my office and she said, look, I see you're irate. I get it, but you don't really have a choice here. You know, my people are dying, your students are dying, and you don't have to teach abstinence, but you do have to use the Bible to work, you know, towards changing what's happening here. And again, that was a moment where I thought, you know, I was told there, you know, and I was taught there how much I had left to learn. And I learned that the Bible can be a really great resource. So I didn't use the Bible to teach about abstinence, but I did teach it and use it to open up pathways to talking about illness and, you know, how is illness depicted in the biblical text? And how can we activate compassion? That's a form of activism. Activism doesn't have to be about chopping down flagpoles. It can be about actively teaching to change towards being better and doing better and doing so more compassionately. I've also found teaching in Leeds, my students love learning about the Bible in relation to activism. One of our best modules is on religion and human rights, where we teach a significant Jewish component. It simply works. I simply can't now take activism out of the work I do because I enjoy it, because it's meaningful to me, and because it cannot be prized out. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to talk us through some slides, but just to give you time to catch your breath, I'm going to give a little plug for the Jewish Christian Bible Week. I think it's the 55th or 56th annual one. It is taking place next month at Haus Orbeck in Osnabrück in Germany. And this year, it's on the first half of the book of Daniel. It'd be hard to imagine a bigger activist, a biblical activist than Daniel. It's also hard to imagine one that we in the Jewish community ignore more than Daniel, whom we hardly ever talk about at all. Not sure if there are still places, but it's always worth trying to find out. So now we're going to go on to some quotations from Activism Bible and research-based teaching. Please, Johanna.
Thank you so much. So this is something I just wanted to share with you. It kind of follows on nicely from hearing about Daniel just now, who's a really interesting activist. You know, very, very strong and outspoken on the one hand, somewhat accommodating of the situation he was in on the other. He's not always only an out there activist, is he? So I think these passages here that I just wanted to share with you that come at the start of the book that Robyn and I were waving around, which incidentally you don't have to buy because many of the earlier versions of the chapters in this book, 12 of the 14 earlier versions, are open access in the Journal for Interdisciplinary Biblical Studies. But when we created the book, I selected these two quotations from 2 of the 14 chapters, and that includes one, the chapter by Robyn and Deborah, because they really speak to the book as a whole. And so I just wanted to read them out and single them out to get us thinking about activism in its many forms. I think the pictures we saw just before pointed in the historical example at the bottom of the screen to maybe the things that come first to our mind of putting your life on the line. But I think these quotations are a reminder that it can happen in quieter ways also. So the first quotation by Dala Shum and Jennifer Kosed, who wrote a chapter on ableism and the Bible in disability studies. One excerpt from their chapter says this: critique of the Bible is not enough. Ultimately, the critique needs to be turned to current issues and contemporary practices. Activism is about changing the world one inhabits, not about critiquing the world of the past. From the classroom to the campus to the world, activism ripples outward, expanding circles of justice and inclusion. I think that's a beautiful passage. That's part of a really remarkable chapter. And the next is by Robyn and Deborah. And long before I knew I was coming to this event today, this was put at the front of the book as part of the dedication. The book is dedicated to activists who change and improve our world. Activism is the process and the way in which we enact our power. It may be intentional or not. It may take the form of organizing in community, protests, parliament, or in individual conversations. A comment in a class, being one who stands up in or to society. So they're really beautiful quotations, and I hope in the questions we might have time to address some of the very many things we're asking you to absorb here in this back and forth between us. So thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you very much. We have one final question and then we're going to open it up. And this is a very brief one. You only get 2 minutes each for this. And the question is, how does activist biblical studies encourage collaboration, particularly for feminist scholars, writing, supervising, learning together, or whatever? So, Deborah, please, 2 minutes.
I'll be brief. I alluded to the Shiloh conference, which was my sort of journey into greater collaboration. It's where I met Johanna, and it was how I got into this world. And that journey has taken me to co-authoring an article with Robyn, which just seemed supernatural to me, that rather than writing about my class as this sort of authoritarian figure of teacher, I should write about my class with somebody who studied with me, and that the article should grow out of that joint experience. I'm also now able to co-supervise Robyn's PhD with Johanna, which is and another colleague as well. Just been a fantastic experience. It enables a real dialogue or trialogue or whatever you want to call it. It's not just us telling Robyn what to write by any stretch of the imagination. And yeah, it's enabled me to learn from colleagues and from people who become friends and to grow together. And for myself, I feel that in a feminist space or in an open and inclusive space, and by feminists, I don't mean women, I mean people who have a particular kind of outlook, people who count all of us in, who are inclusive and open, then I find those spaces so much easier to be in and also to draw strength from, because ultimately to be an activist also requires renewing oneself and one's own energy levels. And every time I will speak particularly to these two amazing women, to Robyn and Johanna, I am with them, I feel energized afterwards. I feel that I have got something from them that enables me to go on.
Thank you, Deborah. Johanna, collaboration?
Oh yes, I couldn't be without it. It's a sort of lifeblood of the work I do, and yes, I can only echo working with Deborah, with Robyn, with so many other wonderful people. I like that proverb, "I am because we are." I think that's there's something a great truth in that. The collaboration, good collaboration, when it isn't competitive. Is a mutually enriching thing, much bigger than the sum of its parts, and so I'm a big fan of it. Deborah, you've said so well what I wanted to say already, and I've also found co-supervision a really wonderful thing. When I started out being a supervisor, it was me in a room with one student, and it's so much richer to have other people there to bounce ideas around. And it's a beautiful thing when the PhD student, at first there's a lot of one-wayness where supervisors guide, and then it turns, then the good PhD student turns it around, and we become the ones who learn from them. And everybody wins. That's the beautiful thing. Everybody gains and everybody wins. And I just so welcome that. So, and thank you for letting me be in this space today. I can't wait to hear the questions and to yes, gather some of your responses.
Thank you. Robyn, please.
Yeah, so it's great. It's great to be in this space and to know that this is also my reality for the next couple of years, which is great. Deborah and I, one of the heading of ours, we quoted Adrienne Rich, a feminist scholar, who I learned this saying from Rabbi Sheila Schulman again, which is adds an extra thing to the Hillel quote. If I'm only for myself, who am I? And at the end, she writes, if not with others, how? And that's how we situated it. And for me, that really is a missing piece of the puzzle. The liberation theologian and educator Pablo Freire talked about different modes of education, and he said, we kind of alluded to this, there's a banking mode of education where it's transactional. There's a teacher over here and the students down here. They have things to impart to the students. Collaborative thinking and learning is actually a very radical, and it's not radical for us as Jews because we're used to doing it, but it is radical to have everyone's voice included. The yeshivot, the yeshivas where the male rabbis would study, where all of our texts come out of, Chavruta, those were only male spaces. What we're doing now is talking about, and Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza, who's an amazing biblical scholar, talks about radical democratic spaces. And that's where everyone's voice can be heard. So I think yes to collaboration, but it has to be the right kind of collaboration, where everyone's voice is lifted up and recognized. Everyone is seen for being who they are, and real relationships are formed. And I was actually going to finish by referencing Bible Week, because I went for the first time last year. It's like a project with Leobeck College. I know Michael's gone for many years and I'm just a newcomer, but I got very involved very quickly. And that's because I had a very profound experience in the text group, and that was about collaboration. You're learning with people, very deep text study from very different backgrounds, and it's in Germany, and that's not insignificant, I think. And I and one other woman in the space, who's a member of clergy as well, were in tears a lot of the time, just processing various things that the Psalms were bringing up or releasing from us. And those moments of what it is to be in collaboration, if not with others, how I could not do that work and come out anew if I wasn't with other people, experiencing the empathy, the compassion, and also the challenge, and having assumptions changed. And again, that's where the Shekhinah, where we say in Judaism that a divinity rests, is when we're doing the collaborative work. But I would just urge us that it's, and we could talk about what feminism, how we define it, but what those anti-oppressive spaces, when they're in collaborative spaces, look like as well.
Thank you so much. And thank all of you for sticking to time so well. We're absolutely bang on schedule, which leaves us 10 minutes for questions. There are 3 ways you can ask a question. You can put it in the chat. You can go to reactions on your screen and press raise hand, or you can just wave around and hope I notice you. So, Sherry, please, unmute yourself when I call you.
Thank you very much. I found this absolutely fascinating. I realised that I didn't actually understand what activism was at the beginning of this session, and I've got a much better idea. And to me, it feels like a sort of a deconstructing of the power systems that underpin the text. It's our right to analyse, to resist, to ask awkward questions. But my question to you, which I hope will not be awkward, is, are there any examples of activist learning within the Tanakh or Talmud? Are there any places where you can say, look, it's actually happening here? Given the lack of women in all of this. So I do tend to think that there's a connection between feminism and activism. But yeah, anything that you can actually say, look, this is an example of what we mean.
Robyn?
Yeah, I'll be a bit brief, but I feel like I've not done my job well as a daughter, that we haven't had a bigger conversation about this before. But anyway, the people that I'm playing with at the moment is the daughters of Zelophehad. So my dissertation is bringing marginal female characters together in collaboration, because you're right, there's not many examples of it. We can definitely list a few, and I'll talk about the daughters in a second, but I'm going to keep quoting Sheila, but that's because all my work's based on what she kind of brought. She said that women typically aren't in the Tanakh because that's where the danger comes from. Women weren't allowed to go out together because that's where potential for change. They realize that that's, you know, an individual woman doing action is one thing and has a great deal of power, but bringing, you know, those who are marginalized and persecuted together is where the power comes from. So I think the daughters of Zelophehad is a very powerful and quite unusual example of 5 daughters who went to Moses, who went to God to say, this law is not just. We should get the property of our father after he dies. There's no other male relatives. Why are we getting, you know, and they are articulate, they speak, they are strategic, they act together, they are named. So I think for me, they're a great example of maybe not learning together, but certainly collaborating and power of the marginalized using their voice.
Thank you.
I think that's a great example, Robyn. The examples I can think of are really problematic and challenging. I mean, probably the quintessential, if you like, activist protest, whatever, of rabbinic literature is the Bar Kokhba revolt. But it's riddled with all sorts of problems. And even the recorded, we don't have a recorded history per se in the Talmud, but the stories that the rabbis tell are somewhat ambivalent about it as well, because it's hugely dangerous what they're doing in rebelling against Rome, although they're challenging authority and they're standing up for Torah study and a whole range and for national self-determination and a whole range of things that in principle we might think are decent things. They also are doing it in a hugely risky, quite male, quite violent sort of way that ultimately actually isn't successful. So that's definitely there. I like the daughters of Zelophehad's approach much better. Maybe Johanna has a different thought.
No, I don't. I mean, I love your question, Sherry, and I don't have a very intelligent answer. I always like to say to my students that changing your mind, thinking, reflecting, changing your mind is a good thing. And I always like to use the example of God changing his mind when in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, there's that passage about the parents who eat sour grapes. No, the children who eat sour grapes and the parents' teeth are set on edge. Have I got it right? Or have I got it the wrong way around? And that's completely overhauled. That used to be the case, but nah, we're doing something else now. So I always think the preparedness to reconsider, to turn things on their head, is a good thing in a classroom that encourages activism. So, but no, I can't think of a good example from the Tanakh right now. There will be one. It's just not springing into my head. Beautiful question. Thank you.
Can we go to the Weinsteins, please? Do you want to ask?
Yes.
Joy.
Can you hear us?
Yes, just about.
Okay. This is my sweetheart Joy, and I am Herb Weinstein.
They're my parents.
And we are terribly embarrassing, Deborah.
I'd like to share experiences I had in teaching that bring out both the activism and the collaboration. So teaching has been my second career, starting off in the oil business and then getting into teaching secondary education, 7th grade through 12th grade, math, science, computers. So one of my first experiences was at Parish Episcopal School in Dallas, a private school. I was the first Jewish teacher, and we had many Jewish students in the school, as well as Christians of all denominations. And so I was, so first of all, there's activism on the part of this Episcopal school. So I, for the most part, was teaching math and science to 7th and 8th graders. So in particular, pre-algebra to 7th graders, algebra and honors algebra to 8th graders. And one of the first signs of, or second signs of activism at this school was they realized all the years that girls had suffered under the hand or the statement, oh, girls don't do math, forget about it, don't worry about it. Okay, here they actively undertook in the middle school years, 5th through 8th, to have separate classes for boys and girls so that the girls could come into their own and feel good about their math abilities and the ability to succeed. But then in 8th grade, so we taught regular algebra and honors algebra. Regular algebra, so I taught separate girls and boys, and they both thrived. But the foresightedness of Parish Episcopal School was that at the level of honors algebra, girls could succeed at the same level or even further than the boys. So I taught girls and boys together, and it was just an absolute pleasure to see them interacting and challenging each other.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, there's one more thing I wanted to say. Okay, so after retiring from that teaching, I now teach at a local college in an adjacent community, which has a program called SAIL, S-A-I-L, Seniors Active in Learning. And so I teach now students from ages 55 to 95 and above. And one of the greatest pleasures is that and one of my mantras throughout is that I learn as much from my students as I do in learning about the course that I'm teaching. Okay, so to have my students now being my teachers being able to learn from their life experiences. And one of my favorite students, and both Joy and I take courses as well as teaching there. One of our favorite students is Ann Stevens, 94 years old.
Young.
And she is one of the sharpest students in the class and always has something most important to contribute from her life experiences. And I just want to share the wonders of teaching that have filled my life.
Yeah, fulfillment is what it's all about. Thank you all for taking part. I'd like to invite Deborah to thank everyone and wind up our evening.
Well, first of all, a big thank you to Michael for being here to shepherd us through and keep us to time, and massive thanks to Robyn and particularly to Johanna, who I think we're going to have to start making an honorary member of Leobeck College very soon. A huge thank you to the tech team behind us, to Izzy, who had to put her daughter to bed in between bits, filling in last minute, and to the people at the college who helped organize this and who have been organizing the campaign, particularly to Sophie and to Rivka. And but really the biggest thanks is to all of you for being here, and for your continued support for Leobeck College. I hope this has given you all some kind of insight into why it is we do what we do, why what we do might be a little bit different to what you might think of in terms of degree level education, and why it's so important to the future of our progressive Jewish world, which is really what the college's mission is about. And I hope that you'll help sustain us to sustain you. So please, doesn't really matter how much it is, but whatever you can do to support the college is greatly appreciated. And if you want to continue to learn with us, please have a look at our Lehrhaus page on the website. You can join from anywhere in the world. It is all online, and they are in different sort of time zones as well. And we can also, if you are local in London and you'd like to study with us, please do be in touch, particularly if you're interested in training for the rabbinate. But thank you all so much for being here and for listening to us tonight. And I hope that you've enjoyed our conversations. And I hope to see you all again very soon at another college event. If you're interested, again, if you're around, we have the Viva Day on the 3rd of July coming up, where our final year students will be presenting about their rabbinic dissertations, which is fascinating. If you're interested in attending that, please get in touch with our office. And if you're around, all of our supporters are invited to ordination this year on the 7th of July, when we'll be ordaining 5 new rabbinic colleagues, which is very exciting. Thank you again for coming.
Good night, Shabbat Shalom, and Chag Sameach.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, Mom. Bye, Dad. Bye, Bernard. Hope to see you at ordination, Bernard.